Alrighty, I recorded yesterday but did not have time to upload, so I'm going to be putting up two today. Already up should be the RFK video. Scarcely could call it a video since I don't actually record any video, just audio. And I have since listened to the full speech, so for those of you who might be a little concerned that, hey, what are you doing talking about this? You only listened to 30 minutes of it. I did listen to the full 2 hours. And it was good stuff. I recommend you go take a listen to it. It was a little hard to find on YouTube. I should have linked to the video directly. But if you type in RFK Jr. campaign speech and you find one that's like an hour and 56 minutes, that's the right one. Basically, I listened to the rest. It didn't change my opinion. So everything that I said, I stand by that. So I just wanted to add in that little editor's note to the front of this one, because this is being recorded on Friday. The RFK thing I recorded on Thursday. What I would like to discuss today is the Mike Morell confession. It came out yesterday that, I believe it was yesterday, that Mike Morell, who I believe was former CIA director, that he was one of the key people behind that letter back in October 2020 that said that Hunter's emails is Russian disinformation. Now, I don't remember exactly what I said about it at the time, but I'm pretty sure if you went back to what I had to say in October of 2020 about a bunch of spooks signing a letter saying that Hunter's emails were Russian disinformation, I probably was not very receptive of what they had to say, and in fact, I probably would have made fun of them and believed it more likely that they were the ones spreading disinformation. And lo and behold, we find out now, 3 years later, 2.5 years later, really, that of course that is true. Mike Morell admits that the 50 intelligence officials, high-level people from all of the different three-letter agencies, that it was in fact just an op, a disinformation campaign led by none other than the Biden campaign. It was Joe Biden's presidential campaign who came up with the idea of creating this letter, and so it was all campaign material. It wasn't a group of concerned citizens who have an expertise in Russian disinformation coming out and saying, this really looks like Russian disinformation. No. Obviously, the Biden administration, they saw this, all this thing about Hunter's emails come out, and they said, gee, this looks bad for us. We got to get some guys to go out there and say that this is a nothing burger. Nothing that Mike Morell admitted is at all shocking. It shouldn't be shocking. But just like the stuff that the Pentagon leaker, this poor 21-year-old guy who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and if they ever let him out of prison, he will not have a happy life. He may as well just die at this point. I don't mean to be glib, but, really, what do you have left to live for? It's all downhill from here. Now, I'm not promoting suicide. I think suicide is a bad thing. But I'm being honest, if I were in the kid's position, I would try and kill myself. At least I think so. I don't think I would have the strength, at 21, to know my life is never going to get any better. But that's a different topic for a different day. What that guy exposed were things that were not shocking to me in the least. But they were good to have confirmed. I don't think that there are a lot of persuadable people, but what few people who are left who are persuadable, I think could be persuaded by this kind of information to know, hey, when the spooks come out and they tell you, hey, this is our objective opinion, and it just happens to completely line up with the Democratic Party, it's probably safe to assume that they are just putting out propaganda in favor of the Democratic Party. And it's not that I think that the CIA is controlled by the DNC. I don't think that Nancy Pelosi is pulling the strings at the CIA and the FBI. I think it's the opposite. I think that the Democratic Party is controlled by the spooks. And so when the spooks opine on politics, it is going to be to benefit their political front group known as the Democratic Party. And there's plenty of spooks in the GOP as well. In fact, all of the leadership are, I think, closely aligned with the spooks. But the GOP, the spooks know that they don't have as firm of a grip over the GOP, and certainly they didn't have as firm of a grip over Donald Trump as Joseph Robinette Biden. So the only way that you're going to see the spooks turn on the Democrats is if somehow Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is nominated as the Democrats' presidential candidate. He, I do think, is more anti-deep state than Trump. In fact, I don't want to get back into talking about Kennedy, but as I listen to the rest of that speech, he attacked Trump from what some might describe as the right. He attacked Trump for lockdowns, for letting Fauci run out of control, for not reining him in and getting rid of him. And he attacked Trump for not being tough enough on the deep state. And he is running now to completely abolish the CIA. And so, it's interesting. He's running against Trump and attacking Trump on, good things that Trump deserves to be attacked for. Whereas Democrats typically attack Trump for the things that he does right rather than the things that he does wrong. And so, that is a strong reason to believe that RFK Jr. has no shot in a Democratic primary, but I said the exact same thing, not that I had a YouTube channel, back in 2015 and 2016 about Donald Trump. Trump said things that you should not be able to say as a Republican. He told Jeb Bush that George W. Bush lied us into war in Iraq. That was a Democrat talking point. That's not something you're supposed to be able to say as a Republican, and yet he did. And now that's the default position. So now that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says something very similar in the Democratic primary, we look at that as right wing. But just a few years ago, when Trump was saying that in 2015 and 2016, we thought that was left wing. We thought it was so strange. Trump is attacking Republicans from the left. And now, even though Kennedy is saying very similar things, making very similar points, it seems like he's attacking Trump from the right. Just shows you how malleable these concepts are. Right and left have never been a set of policy positions. It has always been a state of mind and a way of looking at and viewing society. So getting back to Mike Morell apparently says that this whole idea of the letter was first broached with him by none other than Tony Blinken, the bumbling Secretary of State, who I think potentially is worse than John Kerry. At least John Kerry had height going for him. Tony Blinken is just small, diminutive, he's soft-spoken. That was the term I was looking for. Excuse me, in my old age, I start to lose certain phrases that I don't invoke enough. My vocabulary is slipping. Now, in related news, we're told that I think it's going to be next Tuesday, old Joseph Robinette Biden, the 15th, is going to announce officially his re-election campaign, which is going to be interesting because if the Democrats really do go all in, the Democrat establishment goes all in on Biden, and his only competition is RFK Jr., there's no energy behind Biden. There never has been. In 2020, that energy went to Bernie, but I think certainly, RFK's speech, that was pretty fiery. It was engaging. It was not tough to sit through 2 hours of RFK Jr. speaking. It was obviously very different from a Trump speech, but it was equally engaging. In fact, I think just because I'm a little more into these sorts of issues, I found it more engaging. But what I'm trying to analyze is more the style. Are they an engaging speaker for an audience who is not necessarily interested in whatever issues? There were some people like Art Bell. Art Bell, I could listen to talk about anything because he was a good speaker. He was a good radio host. Another person is Leo Laporte. Leo Laporte had a call-in show where older people could it was tech support, essentially. It was tech support for the listeners. People would call in and have questions about their computer, and he'd try and answer them. And I listened to him every Saturday, back when they used to syndicate his show on the local radio station here, because he was a good host. He was a good speaker, and he could make even very boring he could make tech support interesting. I think RFK Jr. has a similar style of that. And so as people are exposed to him, I think he will attract a bit of a following. That's far from saying that he's going to win, but I think that there's going to be a problem for Joe Biden if he has a primary challenger with a lot of energy, and there's no energy behind him. I think that RFK Jr. could be the Patrick J. Buchanan of 2024. Pat Buchanan had a lot of energy behind him in 1992. He tried to challenge George H.W. Bush because George H.W. Bush was a weak candidate. He ultimately was unsuccessful in the primary, but the lack of enthusiasm for Bush continued, and a lot of Buchanan's voters in the Republican primary ended up voting for Ross Perot, an independent candidate, in the general election. And if Kennedy's able to amass a certain following, I think that those people will not be easily reintegrated and unified, behind Joe Biden if he wins. I think that people who get attracted to RFK Jr., even if they initially, would have been people like, okay, yeah, I'm going to vote for Biden because he's the Democrat. I think that if Kennedy is able to red pill a certain percentage of Democrats, I think there's going to be a lot of them that are not going to go along for the ride. In 1992, they let Pat Buchanan give a speech at CPAC, or not CPAC, at the RNC, to try and, create some camaraderie and integrate Pat Buchanan into the broader, Republican campaign, which of course had George H.W. Bush at the head of it, and they were horrified. They couldn't hide their disgust with what Pat Buchanan had to say. It was this very speech that introduced the term culture war to modern American politics. I mean, I assume that Pat lifted it from the Kulturkampf in Wilhelmine, Germany, Bismarck's war on the Catholic minority of that country. But ever since Pat Buchanan's speech in 92, it's become a ubiquitous term here in the United States, and the Bush Republicans just couldn't stand it. They were horrified. They thought that this was, Hitler-esque. And so it's no surprise that I think they were unable to integrate Buchanan's supporters into a winning coalition. I think it's even possible that RFK, wakes up some Democrats, who end up supporting him, but then at the end of the day, if RFK ends up losing, they might feel that Trump represents their ideas and is closer to RFK Jr. than Biden is, which is a similar effect to what happened in 2016. You had a certain percentage of Bernie voters who just couldn't get behind Hillary. They didn't listen to Sarah Silverman, who made fun of them and said, hey, you Bernie or both people, you're stupid. And they said, you know what? No, we don't need this. We'll just vote for Trump because he's closer to what Bernie is than Hillary. When you have someone who supports a candidate who is against the system, they're not just going to rally behind someone who is, in favor of the system and who is an artifact of the system. Or in the case of Joe Biden, a pawn of the system. Now, this is going to be difficult because, obviously, RFK Jr. is not he has very different policies than Bernie, even though they both are seen as enemies of the Democratic establishment, or at least they were at the time. Bernie has been successfully integrated into the Democratic establishment. He's not the guy he used to be, even though it's funny. I still don't think he's a registered Democrat. Yet he's behind party leadership 100%. What's the point in being an independent if you're, if you just get in line with, the Democratic Party? But anyway, RFK Jr., made it clear, he's not a socialist. He's not a fan of Marx and Lenin. He made some, comment about, Washington and Jefferson, not Marx and Lenin. So it's not going to be the same exact people. It's not going to be the same people who want the same ideas, but it's people who tap into the same energy, who are feeling the same anti-establishment angst. Just like how, there's a lot of people, I mean, I know them in my personal life, who were diehard Ron Paul supporters in 2008 and 2012, who became diehard Trump supporters in 2016. I looked at that and I thought, Ron Paul and Donald Trump are so different. They have so many differences. But they appealed to the same kind of voter, even though they focused on completely different issues in their campaigns. And, you have Trump, who's Mr., hey, entitlements to the moon, we need to lower the retirement age. Hell, let's start giving you Social Security at age 40. And then you had somebody like Ron Paul, who, if you asked him, he would say, well, I want to abolish Social Security. No Social Security for anybody. You had Ron Paul, who was end the Fed. That was his campaign slogan. And then you had Trump, who said, the Fed is being way too tight. The Fed needs to print more money. The Fed is way too tough on inflation. We need more inflation in this country. And yet, there was the same kind of voter who voted for both of them. So I don't think it's impossible that RFK Jr. Becomes the Trump of 2024. It's harder to do in a Democratic primary because the Democrats are even less fair than the Republicans were in 2016. I think that the Democrats have a much stronger organization. They always have. They, of course, have superdelegates, which are just automatic votes for Biden. I've talked about that over and over. But again, they've changed the order in which the states come. They're doing everything they can. And in 2020 and 2016, I mean, they purposefully screwed up and the reporting on stuff, so you didn't know who won what states when. To the point to where, Bernie won a bunch of states and, he didn't even get credit for them until like months down the line when he had already lost. And then we found out at the end, like, wow, he won a lot of states in 2020. But, he didn't put up much of a fight either. He just sort of took it lying down and said, yeah, there we go. And, and he got his book deal and, and they satiated him and they bought him a third house and he's been a good boy ever since. RFK will not be a good boy. It's just not, I don't think that that's in his nature. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.